All right, welcome to day 2. We are talking about lesson 1-2. So that's what you would title the top of a brand new page in your math spiral. It is talking about tenths and hundredths place, and it's on page 8 in your book. So I am going to show you, and you will write along with me, all of this down on a brand new piece of paper in your spiral. It should be the first clean page after yesterday's lesson. So today you're going to represent decimals in the tenths and hundredths place as fractions. You will also be able to represent fractions with denominators of 10 and 100 as decimals. All right, remember last year when you talked about equivalent fractions? So if we're talking about a half, isn't a half the same as 2/4? Because if you have 2/4, you can do what? You can simplify it. I can divide the top by 2, and I can divide the bottom by 2, and I can get a half. The same with 4/8. I can divide by 4 and divide by 4 because 4 goes into 4 and 4 goes into 8, and that can give me a half. So 4/8, 2/4, and 1/2 are all the same thing. And also remember that if you have a number such as 10 on top of itself, that is equal to, do you remember what it is equal to if you have the number on top is the same as the number on the bottom? It is equal to 1. And you can remember that by saying that these zeros cross out, these ones cross out, there's nothing left, so you just have 1. So if I have this, Johnny made 3 out of 10 baskets, and I want to show this in a fraction. How can I do that? Turn and talk to your partner and come up with some different ways of how I can show 3 out of 10 baskets that Johnny made as a fraction. So 3 out of 10 as a fraction would look like this, because remember, a fraction is the whole is on the bottom. That's how many shots he tried in all. And the part that he made, or the part of the problem, is 3, and that goes on top. So he made 3 out of 10. All right, now on your practice, it's going to ask you, I want you to make this 3/10 into a decimal. And so, if you need to, you can look at this tool, your place value chart. And your decimal is right here. Oops. Your decimal is right here, because here's the normal ones, tens, hundreds, right? Well, since the bottom of this fraction is 10, we know that we're working in the tenths place. So we are going to write this 3 down here in the tenths place. So would this be true? This can be a quiz question. Would this be true? 3/10, is that equal to point or decimal 3? Yes, it's the exact same thing, because all we did is tell us that we had a 3 in the tenths spot. Now let's reverse it. If I had a decimal 7 on my chart and I wanted you to create that into a fraction, how would you write 7/10, which is how you would say 0.7, you would say 7/10. How would I write that as a fraction? I would write it as 7/10. So anytime you're working with numbers that are on this side of the decimal, it is always, 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 always a fraction. If you're working with only numbers over here, then you're just working with regular whole numbers. So today, we're definitely only talking about this side, which is decimals turning into fractions. So now let's move it over one. So our decimal still stays in the same spot. It's always between the ones and the tenths, right? And pretend that I had, let's say, pretend I had a 0 in the tenth spot and a 2 in the hundredth spot. How would I write that as a fraction? Well, first we have to ask ourselves, the 0 is in the 10th spot, so we can't do anything there. We need to look at the first whole number, first normal number, which is a 2, and it's in the hundredth spot. So we know that the bottom of our fraction isn't going to be 10, because that was what we did when the number started over here. This number is starting over here, which is the hundredths. So that means we have to make it out of 100. Now, what's our part? What's the top half or our numerator of our fraction? It would be 2. So you're saying this is 2 over 100 or 2 hundredths. So with your partner, I would like you to make 0.09 or 9 hundredths into a fraction. Go ahead and do that now, and then we're going to talk about it. So you guys should have got 9 over 100. You got the 100 because it starts in the hundredths, and the 9 comes from up here, 9 hundredths. Another way to look at this would be to look at one of these cubes that have 100 squares in all, and they have only filled out 9 cubes out of the 100. So 9 over 100 is the exact same thing as this, 9 hundredths, which is the exact same thing as this chart. It's all just shown in different ways. So right now we're going to try a couple together as a class since we're still learning how to work this. I'm going to write them on here and you're going to fill out the quiz questions, and once you're all done, we will go over them together. So right now in class, I would like you to write each of the decimals as a fraction and each of the fractions as a decimal. Then answer the 4 quiz questions, or 1, whatever I create it to be. And so yeah, do all 4 problems, and then we'll just put all 4 answers in the answer box for the quiz question, and then we will go over it together as a class. So for the answers, for the first one, we should have gotten this, and we'll pause and talk about it. The second one, we should have gotten this. We will pause and talk about it. Third, we should have gotten either 0.9 or 9/10, or you could have just written a decimal 9. And the last one, we should have gotten 0.07 or 7 hundredths, or I would also accept just the decimal 0.7. Now, the last thing I'm going to teach you today is how to write a number, or a number that contains a decimal. I would like you to write it as a fraction. So I want you to make this into a fraction, which is almost the exact same as we did earlier. So the first thing I want to do is we start with 3.2. I want to kind of ignore the 3 for right now. And remember what we do when we just have the 0.2? It meant that it was 2/10, because this is in the 10th spot. And if you get confused, write it in your chart. So this is another version of the chart. But see, here's your decimal, and we have a 2 after our decimal. So it says tenths. So remember, this was 2/10. Okay, now let's go back to that 3, because we can't just say that 3.2 equals 2/10. The 2/10 is only representing this part. So what do you think we do with that 3? We just attach it on as a whole number. So it's 3 and 2/10, or 3 and 2/10. You say the word "and" when you use the decimal most of the time, so that's what I'm going to stick with. So with a partner, I want you to try this one. I want you to try 9 and 75 hundredths. I want you to turn that into a decimal. So go ahead and try that now. Fill it in your answer box, and we'll see who got it and who didn't, and then we'll talk about why. So remember, ignore this guy, the whole number, because we're going to use him no matter what. So you could really just drop him down. Then the 75 hundredths. Well, remember your hundredth spot is right here. So that's where I would want my 75 to end. So I would say 9 and 75 hundredths. See how the 5 ends at what I'm saying? I'm saying hundredths. And I said 9 and 75 hundredths. That's how you know where you want it to stop. You don't want it to stop over here because that would be the thousandth spot. And I never said thousands. I just said 9 and 75 hundredths. So your answer would be 9 and 75 hundredths, written like that as a decimal. So we're going to do one more together like that, and then I'll show you the reverse way, and that's all for today. So 2 and 43 hundredths. You could put that in your chart. So we would write 2 and 43 hundredths, ending right there. And how would I write that as a fraction? I leave the whole number that's in front of the decimal, and then I create the fraction. 43 over what? Is it over tenths or hundredths? Hundredths. Perfect. So now we're just going to do the opposite, which is changing our fraction into a decimal. So remember, this whole number, it always goes in front of the decimal. Now we remember how to write 1 over 100. We know that 1 has to end up not in our tens place, but in our hundredths place. So we would just add a 0 in front of there. So if we write it in our chart, it would be 2 and 100th. So 2.01. We will try one more like that. We'll do 9 over 3 tenths. We'll do that together as a class. And that's all for today.